Hello, and welcome to another edition of RevTalks. Today, I have the pleasure of having Kyle Smith of the Bridge Group with me. Kyle, how you doing today?
Doing well.
Great, it's good to hear. Today, you all recently released the 2024 SaaS AE Report. So the purpose of our conversation today is really to take a look at the report to discuss trends and key findings and offer some guidance related to building out RevOps strategies for our listeners, those hiring managers, sales managers, revenue leaders that are trying to set up their teams, plan quotas, and overall crush their sales results. So let me kick it over to you, Kyle. Where do you start? I know you all covered some of this information in a video already. So I'm gonna let you have the keys to the car, and I'm gonna be co-pilot.
Yeah, sounds great. And so what we can do in this conversation is not just do a readout of the data, which everyone can have access to, but we can also talk about some specific examples, like you just said. What do you do with this information, or how should you as a frontline leader or a sales executive make decisions based off of what these market trends are telling us? So I think that's what could be one of the interesting takeaways. And so in chronological order, as the report is laid out, I think one of the interesting things from this report that really stuck out was a massive change in the experience required at hire paired with ramp time. And so one of the things that we saw was that experience required at hire jumped up almost a full year. And so I just pulled it up, which we saw in 2022, average experience required at hire was 3.5 years. 2.5 years rather. This year's report is 3.6. So almost a full year increase on experience required at hire. That's a lot. And so a lot of reasons why that could be. So you see layoffs, you see a tighter economy, specifically within B2B tech. And so people are less apt to quit, move jobs, and take that next leap. So they're staying at their companies longer. And companies who are then hiring for outside roles, which is fewer, can be more stringent in their hiring criteria and qualifications required. And so 3.5 years of experience for an AE is a pretty big jump up. But I don't know if that's going to continue in the second half of 2024 and beyond, but only time will tell, I suppose.
Yeah, you know what I found interesting about that part of the report is that that number changed dramatically when you all were talking about companies in the 0 to 20 million annual recurring revenue range.
Yes. Yeah. Big jump ups in terms of what even smaller companies are able to require. So typically you're a smaller company, you have no brand, and maybe you have more limited resources financially to go out and attract top tier experienced talent. And what a tighter hiring environment looks like when it favors the employer is that even the small companies were allowed to get a little bit more picky. I don't know if you've been on LinkedIn and looked at job postings, but it seems like every single sales role job posting is 100+ applications within like 2 days. And so every application that goes up on LinkedIn gets 100 applicants. Even the smaller companies can get a little bit more picky in terms of how much experience they're requiring.
Right. So we're looking at a situation where there's more demand in the market for some of these job openings that are available. That's giving the employers, if you're a hiring manager, you've got a lot more options. You also might run into a little bit of overwhelm from so many people sending resumes in. Right. So I think it was between the ACV, let's see here, ACV 5,000 to 25,000. So when people were selling products with an annual contract value of $5,000 to $25,000, 48% less than 2 years. 48% of them were looking for less than 2 years experience. 31% of the respondents said they wanted 2 to 3 years of experience. So we're there between 0 and 3 years of experience was really where the companies selling products at $5K to $25K a year were landing. That makes sense, right? The less expensive the product, oftentimes the less technical or the less challenging the sales process.
Yeah, just less complicated. Yeah, just less. It's a less complicated sales process, and I think I'll say two things. One, if it's a lower ticket price sale, you don't have to have as many stakeholders involved. You don't have to manage the sales process through as many different stages. So for a 5K deal, you're talking like 2-call close. And so it just doesn't require the same level of closing experience to be able to effectively close a bunch of deals within that space. As you move up, bigger deals, bigger comp, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but the more experienced reps, not everyone's an enterprise rep, but more experienced reps want to make more money, and so often gravitate towards bigger deals because that's where the money is. So I think that's where you see this really play out. So there's a logical piece in terms of how the sales process runs, but then there's also just the human element where more experienced people want to close bigger deals because that's typically tied to more compensation.
So what we just touched on here is the fact that people are generally looking to hire folks with more years of experience, but the ramp time hasn't actually gone up. So even though they're getting a more experienced talent, they're not actually seeing those people reach on target earnings faster. Is that correct?
Correct. So even though they're hiring more experienced people, 3.5 years of experience, it is still taking longer to ramp to full productivity. So average is 5.7, call it 6 months. So 2 full quarters to ramp to full productivity. But really, this is what the data is telling us. But here's what I could say from client experience. Really, the percentage of reps where that number might as well be an infinity sign is much higher than it's ever been. So some reps are just never making it to quota. So even though you're hiring them and they're more experienced, that higher, and you've put resources into training and enablement, where some reps are is just they're never quite making it to that quota because of some of the unfortunate market conditions surrounding them.
Before I ask this next question, I'm going to go ahead and resolve an error that I just made in our starting off this conversation in the first place. I just mentioned the Bridge Group as if everyone knew what the Bridge Group does, but I'm going to go ahead and summarize that the Bridge Group is an SDR AE and account manager consulting firm dedicated to understanding the models, metrics, and motions that deliver scalable growth. So as I continue going down this path of asking Kyle questions, the perspective that they bring, or that he brings, representative of the Bridge Group, is because they're working with companies all the time on helping them make these types of decisions in their RevOps strategy or in their operations. So going back to then what my question was going to be is, why do you think that there is this gap, let's say unexpected level of alignment between someone having more experience, which is assumed that they would ramp faster? Why do you think that there is a longer ramp time occurring regardless of the fact that people are hiring folks with more experience?
Because less people are making quota, period, regardless of when they were hired. So even tenured people on your team, there might be a rep who's been on your team for 3 years. Let's say you had a whole team, a 10-person team, and you don't have any new people. All of them have been there forever. If we're looking at 2022, 6.5 of them statistically would have made quota. 65% of reps made quota. We're taking out ramp, but we'll take ramp off the table for a second. Now, 5 of them would. So only 51% of reps are making quota now, whereas traditionally, and this is for 6 years before this latest report, we're looking at like mid to high 60%. So just less reps are making quota, period. And that uniquely and more dramatically impacts new hired reps.
Is that because organizations or managers, leadership is setting quotas too high?
I don't think so. I think that quotas have only increased 2% a year for 12 years. That's less than inflation. It's inflation has averaged 2.6% over that time. I know it's been more dramatic more recently, but regardless, you have to zoom out. So if you zoom out, you look at a 12-year run, 2.6%, quota's only going up 2. So quota compared to inflation over the past 12 years has not technically increased. So I don't think it's because quotas are too high. I think it's momentary. And so what I'm urging people not to do is have a dramatic overreaction to a 15-year rough run, where really I think this is a story about win rates. Personally, the data does not provide this explanation. So this is my perspective on what the data is telling us. I think when you see a win rate drop from 23 to 19% across a large data set like what we're looking at, it would be impossible to assume that the same percentage of reps are going to achieve quota with that massive of a drop off in win rate.
Well, in that case, we're now saying that the win rate is not necessarily a product of the representative's skill set as well, right?
I think it's a piece of it. Yeah, I do think this is very dependent on each company, but I think a lot of us, myself included, I will count myself, which at some points in my day, I'm still a sales rep. So I think 2021 and 2022 made many of us a little complacent. I think we were all just cashing in on some crazy boom times. And so it made a lot of people feel like we could, not that we could, but that you could get away with not sticking to the best practice fundamentals of running an effective enterprise B2B sales process. And so when those muscles start to atrophy, when you're just riding this boom wave, and then all of a sudden hard times come, there is an adjustment period to be like, all right, wait, I got to get back to like running this process, not just taking orders essentially. So I think there is a little bit of that.
From your perspective, what are some of those fundamentals that may have fallen to the wayside during that boom time?
I think that I'll use a couple different examples. I have one client who got in the habit of qualifying out. So we had bandwidth constraint issues on the part of account executives. We had more opportunities than we had headcount to deal with, and hiring was tough, right? Like that great resignation period. So we literally couldn't effectively ramp fast enough. And so the only way to effectively manage the right opportunities, I'm not saying this was a wrong decision, I think this was the right decision given where they were at the time, was to qualify out early. And so qualifying out early led to, like, if this isn't a real project, if this is super early stage, like maybe they're not making it to stage 2. And so qualifying opportunities out early so that we could only focus on the most serious prospective buyers later on in the sales process made sense and massive revenue growth. So like it worked out fine for that period. But what didn't happen, or what was slow to happen, was a shift back away from that, when all of a sudden we weren't sitting with this massive pipeline full of highly qualified, great opportunities that had a high likelihood to close. And we were still essentially kicking prospects to the curb in the discovery call. When like, this is a good prospect. Like the ICP fit is perfect. Like we have at least an influencer on the phone. And just because they're not coming to us with a fully scoped project, like ready to rock, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be treating them with the care that they deserve and customizing a demo and presenting a solution to them, because they did check those other boxes. Perfect ICP, they had some pain, and we had a good persona. And so I think there was some slowness to shift in specifically that one instance, early stage.
That's almost that's one of those challenging concepts as to what is qualified enough. So let me ask you, when I hear that, I'm thinking that or I'm inferring that from that, maybe the win rate is lower because now these organizations are taking more prospects or more leads forward to the opportunity stage, which would mean maybe the win rate's lower. But one of the things you all don't cover in the report is maybe the volume of wins, or those volumes of that volume of dollars is higher. Overall revenue generated that's what I'm getting from that piece. If we adjusted it for before, they were taking people that could have turned into deals off the table because they were being too strict with their qualification process. then that would be the reversal of that would be what we see now with now you might take more leads to the opportunity level or throughout the rest of the sales process. Because of that volume, you'll see a smaller percentage of them convert, but volume wise, there would be more sales closed or more customers acquired or more revenue generated.
I wish. Yeah, I wish that would be an easier problem to solve. Unfortunately, I think the drop off in win rate is more closely tied to the buyer. Prospects fear and realistic budget constraints. So if you're selling to companies are laying people off, and or they just, to protect their current headcount, they are just saying we're not making additional outside investments. Or you don't have, if you're, let's say you're selling to the VP of marketing, just as one example, the VP of marketing doesn't just have this flex spend that they can use as they see fit without 3 layers of approval anymore, where before they could. And so now they need to go to additional stakeholders for everything. Now there's more people involved in every single decision because no one wants to put themselves out on the plank to say, like, yeah, this is my deal. This is my thing that I'm championing. I think it's the right call, because if it goes wrong, then is it their job? Is it going to cost them their job if they make a perceived misstep on a $150K investment? Maybe.
Right.
Like I think there's inherently more risk for the people who actually consume SaaS and buy SaaS products because of the internal constraints that they're facing. So because of that, they don't want to make decisions on their own. So they want decision by consensus. It's not new, but it got worse. And that leads to a lower win rate, because now instead of needing, maybe if it was 6 or 7 yeses or nodding heads, maybe now it's 8, 9, 10 within an enterprise deal, and same type of proportional scale up. Even if it used to be 1 person, maybe now you need 2 or 3, just more people who can come in and kill your deal, and less people who are willing to take the risk to say, no, we need this. This is my call. It's my budget. Let's go.
So this is it sounds almost like the rise of the buying committee. Overall, we're seeing a lot of the metrics that one would use to manage their sales organization slide down a little bit when it comes to win rates, when it comes to hitting quota, when it comes to I'll extrapolate hitting quota to achieving revenue goals. And one of the pieces that you believe is at the core of that is the rise of the buying committee, which is a symptom of no one person wanting to be so responsible for a failed purchase, if you will.
Yes.
Nice. I also noticed something else in the report that might line up to this when you think about the buyer side. When one of the things you all looked at is the respondents that you all had in this report, and you looked at who they were selling to, not just in general. So different functions in the business, right? Are you selling to IT operations? Are you selling to marketing? Are you selling to HR? But then you all also broke it down by ACV, which I thought was super helpful. And if I tie it into what we're talking about now, how that might affect win rates on the buy side, there seems to be, it looks like in general, IT operations and COOs are just being bombarded by salespeople, and marketing comes in at a close second.
Yeah.
What can we learn from this around the targeting? It's interesting, right? Because I could also, as I look at the different functions, I guess in this world of the buying committee, there's an opportunity for some of these folks to, instead of targeting IT ops first and marketing first, maybe go in through another side of the buying committee that gets a little less attention from the salespeople out there. But what was some of your where you kind of driving your guidance off of this information here around how people are targeting customers or companies?
Yeah, I think this one, I would do 2 things with. One, it just helps to contextualize all the results. So oftentimes when we've been doing this report since 2007, 2008, And so one of the questions people always have is like, okay, but like, who are these people selling to? Or what's the company's revenue? Or what's their average deal size, right? So I think all of those data points help to contextualize everything that a reader is going to consume if they're going through the report, so that they understand the median company revenue is 24 million, and we have respondents on both ends of that bell curve. Median ACV might be 47,000, and then if you look at it, okay, well, 9% of them are targeting IT operations COO with deal sizes 25 to 50K. So I think it helps to contextualize who the people who responded to the survey are going after and what types of companies they work for. So it just helps people think about themselves,
right?
How they should view this data. The second thing would be, it also is a important reminder. We talk a lot of time about competitive differentiation. And so I think what's always helpful when you look at something like this is realizing that it's not only your direct competitors who are competing for the attention of your buyers, it's 50 other technology companies who sell something that has no correlation or relation to what it is that you're trying to sell. But it doesn't matter, because they're still competing for budget and attention from IT or operations or a COO or a CISO or InfoSec. So to me, it's just an important reminder that yes, you're competing against your direct competitors, but you are competing for attention and still budget dollars against 50 other companies who have nothing to do with what you're trying to sell.
So one of the areas you all identified as a buyer group was business owner / CEO, and they're over there kind of separate. What's the logic for that when you think about it? I mean, we know that a business owner, from business owner, I was inferring, it could be someone that's an owner operator also wearing more hats in the company. Then when I go to CEO C-suite, depending on the size of the company, that could be a different kind of person, right? That could be someone that's responsible for talking to shareholders. Or once again, it could be that person that's just kind of got the final decision on a lot of things because, I don't know, they're in a mid-sized company or small company. Let's call that small based on 50 million a year in revenue, which I think in our group here, small is probably a little bit different. So let's just go ahead and say when those folks are falling between the 0 and 20 million in revenue, that CEO is still greatly involved in a lot of decision-making, signing off on the checks and whatnot. How are you all defining that business owner CEO segment?
Yeah, that one's just a catch-all to make sure that we don't have respondents differentiate something that we wouldn't want differentiated in the data set, which is just who's at the top of the decision-making hierarchy. And so whether it's the owner or a more traditional CEO, president, we didn't want to be too restrictive in how we capture the respondents of not a functional leader, but an entire company leader, which would be why we would designate business owner CEO. But in terms of personal experience, I agree. This is mostly for people calling into SMB. Once in a while, you might bubble back up to them in like really, really large deals, even in mid-market companies, but typically not somebody you're going to start with. Might be somebody who jumps in the sales process at stage 3 once you've already jumped through a couple of hoops for functional group leaders.
Got it. Now, let me go to where the leads are coming from. Let's go to the pipeline development information, because that was interesting also. And there was a variance there between ACV or size of company based on revenue as to whether, and I think in general, it looks like you all saw a change in marketing sourced leads versus outbound SDR and self-sourced leads. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, way more sourced by marketing in the latest report of pipeline. And so a couple different theories as to why that could be, but the data is definitive. A higher percentage of an account executive's pipeline came from marketing in the latest report than did in 2022. And so one of the thoughts is that, not to keep harping on it, but tied back to win rate, because win rate takes a drop, you realize as an account executive, you need more pipeline. If you need more pipeline, maybe marketing leads that you've been neglecting or shunning in years prior, we're like, this is like really early on. The lead's not that great. All they did was swing by a booth. All they did is, download one form. Like if leads are being routed directly to account executives, where previously they did not rank high enough and the level of prioritization to demand extra attention, all of a sudden they did. Like I need more ops by any means necessary. And if it means me cold calling a company that has no awareness of our brand or following up more diligently on this marketing inbound, logic says, okay, let me go and get after this marketing inbound now. And so now all of a sudden that percentage starts to increase. That's my theory or hypothesis. Yeah, just one.
So relative to the reduction in the success of the outbound SDRs, seems like the outbound SDRs are being reported as generating less of that pipeline than before. What do you kind of relate that part to?
Outbound got a lot harder across the board.
Oh, you found that a lot.
Yeah, outbound got a lot harder for everybody. And so I think, not to go down a rabbit hole, but I think that there's a lot of reasons for that. This stems back a very long time, but let's just talk about like the last 4 years. Post-COVID, in 2020, email volume doubles immediately post-COVID, just based off of the HubSpot data. If you look at all the providers of marketing automation or email service providers, I'm not sure, but based off of the HubSpot data that I saw in 2020, email volume doubled, directly proportionate to that, response rates cut in half. And then email has continued since then to be bludgeoned as a channel. And so there are so many tools available that allow email at scale that response and engagement rates on email has steadily declined. You see more people shifting out of the office, right? More remote work. So now all of a sudden you're needing to invest significant dollars to ensure that you have cell phone or direct dial phone numbers that aren't going to some company mainline number that will never get you to who you want to talk to. AI introduction, where buyers have some resistance to potentially AI-driven messaging when not done appropriately. I think there's awesome applications for it, but I don't think everybody cracked the code on it in the early days. So response rates down across the board, across most channels. And people were a little slow maybe to make a return back to heavy phone utilization, which seems to be what's working best or most consistently. And so I think that's a huge component of it.
So in general, a lot of noise in the market as buyers were being bombarded by messages enabled by some of the the new tools that allow for mass messaging and largely unpersonalized. We're talking email channels. I guess we could factor automation in there as well, right? I mean, I know if I go down to you all section about activities under metrics and quota, I see that LinkedIn, based on expected activities per day being 60, right? LinkedIn accounted for 20% of that outreach. And there's a lot of automation happening there in LinkedIn. So I guess that's the takeaway that I'm getting from that is, there's just a lot more messaging happening. As all that noise happens, there's less engagement naturally by the people receiving those messages. And also what I heard in what you just said is that there may be an opportunity to get back and use more phone and possibly get a different experience than some of these other companies that are relying heavily on AI and automation to prospect. Would that be a decent enough takeaway there?
Yeah, I think so. And I think a couple other things happening simultaneously. Email service providers getting more stringent. So it's more difficult to make it to the inbox if you're viewed as a bad actor. Like all of a sudden, if your sender score takes a dip, now you're sending emails that don't even make it to the inbox. So even if they're perfectly written, you have awesome subject lines, great engaging messaging, no one's ever seeing it. So your engagement rates are going to be pretty bad. So we're fighting this battle to even make it to an email inbox, fighting this battle to get somebody to be willing to pick up a phone, which I have reps who are excellent at and do really well with that. But then at the same time, you're needing to also compete with all the noise that's surrounding them, not just these technical challenges about getting in front of them. And so once you actually do get some type of buyer engagement, they have so many things competing for their time. These are the same stories, just amplified. Like this is not a new phenomenon or a new trend. It just seems like the level of attention being paid to it got significantly worse. And then also, sorry, one other thing.
Yeah.
If a team has a slight drop off in performance, things are getting rough, and all of a sudden you start spending so much time and attention trying to figure out what's wrong, sometimes you can make it worse. If we're in meetings 3 times a week talking about how to improve messaging to improve engagement rates, and I'm constantly, as a rep, like put myself in a rep shoes, if I'm constantly getting pulled off the phone to talk about why things aren't working and how we need to fix them, how is it possible that you would ever be able to look back at a quarter and say that performance improved when you took away 20% of my selling time trying to talk about what's wrong? So I think there needs to be a balance. I'm not saying you just sit there and bang your head against a wall when things aren't working, but I do think that there needs to be a significant balance and not pull reps off the phone to go talk to, 20 different people and really meaningfully take away activity time. It's one of the things I'm always conscious of when I'm working more directly with teams. So I try to do things like in the course of their normal flow, be really conscious about how much tinkering that I'm doing, make sure that they're controlled tests, and I don't try to blow up the whole org just because we had, a bad 2 months.
So moving from that part into one more interesting piece here around pipeline is self-source pipeline. So the AEs actually doing their own prospecting. You all found that 25% of respondents reported that their AEs are responsible for generating pipeline. And that seemed pretty significant because you also mentioned here this $45 million of pipeline idea and planning for to equip the organization or making decisions about maybe even how many AEs you need to have on your team. 4 to 5 million in pipeline would be a kind of rule of thumb reference, which would mean in this 25% situation, if the pipeline was 4 million, that AE would be responsible for bringing in or sourcing 1 million of that themselves. Could you talk to us a little bit about that? Did I repeat that correctly? Was that
it's pretty close, but it would be like 4x your 4 to 5x. So if you have like a 20% win rate, then you would need 5x $1 million quota, but quota is only 800. So it's pretty close. But yeah, if essentially an AE needing to self-source $1 million in pipeline, the complexity that we can't capture in the report because it just take us down a rabbit hole of detail, but I could shed some light on it for client orgs, is that the sources of those get a little bit more complicated. It's not as simple as an SDR where it's basically like, here's some MQLs coming from marketing and here's lists of names, call them, generate the pipeline. On the account executive side of things, you have channel partners in a lot of the companies that we work with, especially larger orgs. And sometimes that's indicated as self-source pipeline. Sometimes it is existing customer referrals, right? Like, so that technically could be viewed as self-sourced pipeline. So it's not as simple. It's not a direct comparison for AEs producing $1 million of their own pipeline and an SDR producing $3 million of pipeline. They didn't do the same thing to get those dollars. So I think just a little extra context. It's a little bit more complicated when looking at AE source pipeline.
Got it. So if I was to take that back, then what you're saying is that it's not a direct comparison. They're not necessarily doing the same activities as an outbound SDR or using the same sources as an outbound SDR, perhaps with a list that was created with some sales intelligence tool or marketing, right? Which is going to be using ads, perhaps, or one-to-many channels to get the word out. Inbound SDRs was also included in marketing. These self-sourced, this AE prospecting may come from even old accounts who haven't purchased in the last 12 months or 24 months.
Yep.
Right. And the places like that. Got it.
Yeah. Win-backs, customers who churned that you sold to 3 years ago, and then they left a year after that, and now you're selling to them again. A buyer who I've sold, this happens to me all the time, thankfully. A VP of sales who I sold to at company number 1 leaves, they go to company number 2. They call me and they're like, hey, I want to do the same thing we did last time at this new company, right? But it's just there's more sources for their pipeline. Not to say that they shouldn't have some strategic accounts where they're doing some really catered prospecting towards like straight up cold outbound, but that's not the totality of their pipeline sources. Because of the nature of what they do, there's some different sources that come into play that don't exist necessarily for sales development.
Got it. Now, moving on from customer acquisition to renewals, expansion, and upsells.
Mm-hmm.
There's data there, but I came away with this question as I was looking for it, and I want to hear your response to it. Does a company really need both account managers and customer success managers today? What's
Depends.
your opinion?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it depends. It depends on the complexity of the product set, the maturity of the organizations that you're selling to, or the complexity of the organizations you're selling to, the technical complexity of the product. Yeah, it depends. Do I, a professional services company that sells professional services? Absolutely not. It'd be overkill and distracting for the customer. Now, if I'm an organization who either through homegrown builds or through acquisitions, I have a product set of 9 products, let's say. I have 9 products and they buy 2 to start. There is a case to be made, and let's say I'm selling to a $1 billion account. There is a completely valid use case to have both of those roles, where someone is focused on ensuring that the thing that they already bought is actually up, using, and effective, and also hopefully owns like some upsell, like more of the same, more licenses, maybe more divisions, more locations using it. And then you could have an account manager who owns potentially cross-sell new products to the same people. So I got 7 more products I can sell you. We have 9, you only bought 2. So figuring out what's the totality of the product set, what's the complexity of the organization you're selling to, how many buying centers do they have, how many buyers are there that you could sell to, and what's the complexity of your products in terms of implementation and adoption. There's definitely still a case to have both. Less companies are doing it, but there is a case to have both.
Yeah, it's interesting because in my experience, I've found it frustrating as a customer to have a separation between account management and customer success. It's once you get my dollar, once I pay for your product, I'm expecting you to take care of me and make sure I get the most out of that product. But I even had a situation where we ran into we were dealing with our customer success manager on a particular product frequently, and then all of a sudden, when we had something that related to the contract, whether we wanted to extend that, whether it should whether we wanted to renew it, blah, 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 that conversation was happening with somebody that we haven't talked to most of the time. And that just seemed like a weird detachment. I mean, I think that, just giving my opinion, I'm like, man, I would love to see some of these decisions made a little bit based on insights you're getting from customers about how much friction you're causing for them and having to jump around from one thing to the other. I kind of heard that in your answer a little bit too, just in the background, but
yeah. I think one of the other potential benefits is separating success conversations from commercial conversations. So if you're my customer and I'm the consultant who's working with you, our conversations get to be entirely about how do we optimize your sales process, whatever, enablement, whatever. And so when it comes time to talk about renewing with us or potentially adding additional services, you get to still view me as only your advocate. Me, Kyle, the consultant, is only working for you and only thinking about how do we make everything perfect for you from a sales perspective. And if I introduce another person who gets to have a conversation with you about buying additional services, any potential tension or frustration that happens around how much are you going to invest, what are you going to buy, gets separated from you viewing me as your go-to person to ensure like we're doing everything right. And so there is, in certain scenarios, an added benefit to the separation of those. That's not a great example for us because we're sales consultants, but for other organizations who don't have that same revenue mindset and they don't sell to sales or marketing leaders, it can be good to separate the commercial conversation from the success one.
Philosophically, I'll ask you your opinion on this. If that differentiation, if the customer doesn't feel like they got what they were supposed to get from what they bought.
Mm-hmm.
So they're talking to customer success and they haven't, and hey, the customer hasn't been that successful with what you have. Does this account manager even really have the right? I mean, does the company even have the right to ask you for more money? I mean, there's a piece there, right, where we might end up, I was reading one of the articles actually from the research report, right? So I was like looking at the report, and I love the fact that you all added some other resources that other people brought to the table to expound on topics. And one of those was around ACM, what does account manager do versus what does the CSM do? And I was thinking that I was like, man, when we break commercial away from the actual experience of getting value out of your product or service, it creates a divide that a little bit feels like insanity to me. Like, manager, don't even talk to me about an extension. You should be coming to me talking about discounts so you can retain me. Don't talk about me spending more money with you if I'm not happy with your product. And if you don't have all that information and you're forced to have to talk to a CSM to kind of get the feel for that, it's got to change the level of empathy you could have in your interaction with me that could affect whether I actually do give you all another chance to earn my business. Do you feel like, you see what I'm saying there? It's interesting that this guy's responsible for my happiness. This guy is responsible for taking money out of my pocket.
Yes. Yeah.
I keep looking down like my camera's here. It's so funny. I keep looking down and I'm like, oh man, I gotta look at the camera. For those of you all watching, I apologize. It's the fact that I look at my computer screen as if I'm on a web call through there. But go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, I hear you. I think if you're in that situation, anyways, both people are probably in the conversation. If you have an unhappy customer that you're trying to renew or expand, then both people probably need to be there and very clearly outlining and articulating what the proposed path forward is that is both going to rectify the problem that currently exists and also lead to even better outcomes in the future. So in those situations where you have an at-risk potential churning client, there's probably more people involved anyways. You're over-resourcing those situations anyways. But in one where you are extremely happy with me as your advocate, person who's sure that your account's rocking and rolling, having somebody else come in and potentially separate your feelings of what it's like to work with me and our product can be beneficial. Again, I'm not saying that there is no one size fits all. I just have clients where that works exceptionally well. So I would hate to say like blanketly, you don't need both functions. There are certain situations where having both functions work together closely is hugely beneficial and just works well. But to me, it's always like, if I was starting a team from scratch, would I add both functions immediately? Probably not. But it kind of evolves as the business evolves. We just realize like, hey, like there's something that is being underserved within our customers now. Either it's taking care of them or taking care of us on the net revenue retention side. And then that role gets added in, it works, so it gets replicated, right? So like sometimes I like the idea of just letting the market and the needs of the business dictate to the decisions that get made. We don't have to overthink it all the time.
And to piggyback off of what you said there about if you were starting from scratch, you all did find that when companies were under 20 million in annual revenue, they were more often in the area of 3 roles, AE, SDR, and account manager or customer success manager. And then below 5 million, it appeared that you all saw that more companies below the 5 million mark were having the AEs be more full cycle. They're responsible for prospecting and closing rather than having an SDR role, I think more commonly, right?
Yes.
Okay.
It's just logical because
overhead.
There's only so many dollars to go around. Everybody starts with AEs, right? So if you don't have people who can, just early stage companies just starts with them. It's only as they continue to grow that they start to specialize roles.
So moving on to compensation, Man, there's a lot in this report to unpack, guys. I tell you, we don't even have enough time to cover some of the insights that could possibly be extracted from this report. So I encourage you, and I'm going to put a link to, rather, Kyle, if you don't mind, I could put a link also to you all's report and the video for this, so people could have quick access to it in the article. Or if not, go to the Bridge Group website and download the report. Compensation wise, you all found that median on target earnings for account executives came up to 190,000, with 100,000 being the base and 90,000 being comprised of commission and bonuses. Talk to us about that piece. What should folks know about compensation? Let's use that example you just used, right? If you were starting something from scratch, how would you approach this compensation today with such competitive rates? Or are the rates competitive based on what you all have seen over the years?
Yeah, I mean, at 190, again, this directly correlates back to two other things. One, the quota and experience required at hire. And so if you cannot be competitive for 190, which if you have a 50K deal size, you kind of have to be, and you're going to need to be somewhere in this range. But if you weren't able to, based off of your operating plan, offer 190K OTE to an account executive, then you need to reduce experience required at hire. It's like you're going to have to get somebody more junior. You're going to have to you're going to have to be the one who offers an SDR who's being promoted their first AE job, or you're going to have to take somebody who only has a year and a half of experience. You're not going to get a 4-year tenured AE if you're going to need to hire in like the 120, 130, 140 range. People do, like it's possible, but it matters also. I always think about what are the other costs associated with it. How much additional management bandwidth is going to be eaten up if you're an earlier stage company. Also, like, are they rolling right up to a VP of sales? How much time does a VP of sales have to spend with a really junior seller? Like, does it truly make sense to save yourself 30 grand on 3 reps if you're going to dramatically reduce the effectiveness of an executive they're reporting to within an early stage company? That only they can answer that, but I think that's a difficult risk to take. I might even say just hire 2 and hire the right ones versus 3. Like if we need to move budget numbers around, that would be my perspective. But yeah, 190 is the number. I think the interesting thing about this is for the 10 years that I've been with the Bridge Group, I had the perception that AE plans were always 50-50, 50% base, 50% incentive. And like, yeah, it's only 3% shift, but to me, that's interesting and significant, seeing a greater percentage of the total on target earnings moving over to base.
Moving over to base. Yeah. And, there's, from what you're talking about, you're always going to pay, right? You're either going to pay with your money or your time. So when making those trade-off decisions, it's kind of like, which one you're going to pick. Now, what have you seen on your side related to this scenario that I've seen on my side? And that is the fear factor of, if I give this person, if I pay more money, there's still this risk that this person does not perform, right? So balancing that fear of paying more and hoping for better results and not getting them is also at play here, right? How do you all talk to clients about that piece of the issue?
I mean, that's kind of what we do. So build an engine, right? Like you don't build strategy around people. You build a strategy that makes sense for the business, and then you plug people into that strategy in the sales engine that fit the ideal hiring profile for whatever you're asking to do of those people. So the idea needs to be, if you hire people who meet like 5 criteria, I don't necessarily need the most perfect experience in the world, but if you have the right raw skills and some knowledge of how to execute a sales process, I can plug you into an engine that I have designed to assume that maybe, I don't know, it's going to be up to you whether you're going to be 70% or 130%, but you're not going to be a 20% performer if you just run the process the way that it's been designed. So I think building a very well-defined engine and process that does not allow for the extremes, to the best of your ability, that to me is the way to go about it. Just hire people who are smart, hungry, are cultural additions to your organization with some knowledge that will make them effective, and plug them in and go.
So then that's taken us nicely into the last section that we'll talk about here, and that's the frontline leadership and how they're operating. What I hear behind what you say is that it's not the people, it's the process. And you all have a slide here where you look at the what's the responsibility of the VP, senior director level person in the organization. And you all classify it as the visionary and the general. They design the strategy, they build the ideal rep profile, and they sit at the executive table. So they need to be the strategist. So I guess in that strategy, however, designing the strategy, are you all incorporating the building of that process as strategy? Or are we talking about, these philosophers that sit up in the ivory tower and just say, like, you guys need to make this possible? How do you all coach to connect what you said about building systems and processes? So that's going to be processes, and you're probably leveraging tech that could that people can easily plug into, so you're not overly dependent on one person, and the responsibility of leadership in the first place. How are you all talking to these clients about, or to your clients about that?
Yeah, the VP definitely sets the strategy. And when I say strategy, or the way that I think about it, is how many heads allocated across what roles doing what, right? And then how does that all align to us getting to our revenue number? So building the actual plan for how, if you give me a $50 million number and a certain budget, what is the design or makeup of my team that will ultimately get us there? And how do I draw clear lines of ownership or rules of engagement to ensure we're not stepping all over each other's toes, we're targeting the right accounts at the right time with the right message, all that stuff. That would be what I think about when I think about strategy. How do I make all that work together? And then go ahead.
So is that it sounds like you are incorporating that, even building out the sales pipeline, right? Who's on first, who's on second, so that marketing and sales and customer success and or support are all kind of working in harmony. That whole theory of RevOps, revenue operations.
Yes. Yeah. Looking at a sales process from lead to closed one, we typically probably also that vision, maybe not every single nitty gritty detail, but understanding how do we move a buyer through our sales process and what are the different types of interactions and who's doing what would probably be part of that strategy as well.
And in terms of nowadays, right, with all of the focus, the increased focus, which is a little bit laughable, that it's an increased focus on sustainable growth, meaning now, I guess, actually attributable to what you talked about in the times where people were closing deals left and right. One of those fundamentals that fell off the wayside was the importance of customer lifetime value, not only important for hitting revenue goals, but also important for the valuation of any company. Right. So if I took that would be, that strategy would go from the prospect level all the way to how we're earning referrals from our happy customers or partners that may be referring us business that goes right back into our pipeline.
Yeah, I think that one's a little bit trickier because not everybody has ownership over customer success. Not every VP of sales I work with owns customer success. So sometimes at closed one, it's their job is done. And others, they own the whole thing. So thinking about customer advocacy is definitely part of it.
That's fair, I guess. When you say VP of sales, that's fair. Once you bring in, are you all seeing an increased trend of revenue operations in your clients, such that that person at the RevOps level would have visibility across that level, that part of things as well? Are you all seeing an increase there on your side?
Way more, yeah. RevOps is way more prevalent than ever before. CROs are more prevalent than ever before. It used to always be VP of sales, VP of marketing, or an SM. Way more CROs. I'm seeing more CCOs, chief commercial officer, in the last couple of years. But yes, more people owning the full customer life cycle.
Full
for
cycle.
sure.
Are they differentiating CCOs from CROs now? And I mean, I feel like it's alphabet soup out here. It gets crazy. Like, why can't we come up with a common language? What's that?
If there is a difference, I don't know what it is. To me, a chief commercial officer and a chief revenue officer are the same thing. If there is a distinction, I'm not currently aware of it.
Got it. Well, hey, thank you so much, Kyle, for your time and digging into the report a little bit, answering some of my questions, and giving some of your opinions, even if you didn't necessarily want to, and some of those. A lot of value in this report, guys. Go check out the Bridge Group 2024 AE report, and I'm looking forward to the SDR report next year. So thanks a lot for your time, Kyle, and have a good one.
Yeah, thank you.